the exact start time of this game.
Okay.
Or maybe he needs some help with the setup of the tech. Okay, either way, the arbiter has been sent off on a mission.
Ooh. What is this about?
Yeah. Sometimes you just want to confirm that you're starting at the right time or that you've which pieces you've got. But okay, the game has started very quickly. And Praggnanandhaa, he did start with his queen's pawn. We see a transposition to the queen's gambit opening, and Magnus there with that last pawn push with black. He's playing one of his favourite openings, a sideline. I'm quite good friends with one of his coaches, and this is something that they've prepared before a few years ago, just as a surprise weapon, just to get a game, avoiding any mainstream theory where it's all about memorising lots of variations. And, OK, white does play one of the main moves. He pushes a pawn forward. Magnus kind of made a bit of a facial gesture there. Maybe he didn't he was surprised here. He didn't expect Pragg to play that move, and Magnus reacting quite quickly by developing his knight. A stable opening. The pawn structure is slightly reminiscent of Carlsen's game against Firouzja earlier. And actually, Jovanka mentioned this strategy. Anytime he's playing these youngsters, when he played Tari, when he played Firouzja, now he's playing Pragg, he's happy to just block it up. Black has less space to manoeuvre, but he's hoping that because the position is so rich, so tense, no trades so far, he's hoping he can outmanoeuvre them later on.
You have to say something, David, that Praggnanandhaa has actually taken the game into super uncharted waters, because with his pawn move, that's a very indulgent move. It's only ever been played once before. Yeah, and you can see Magnus pause for thought and is trying to work out what is the point behind this little pawn move.
Yep, and the point behind that little pawn move, it might be a bit mysterious for Magnus Carlsen. It's a bit mysterious to most people, but if we just quickly bring up the analysis board in this position, we can see that Praggnanandhaa, the reason he played this move before developing his bishop is because, for example, if the bishop does get attacked later on by the black knight, it can drop back to a very safe square. White's bishop now super safe. It's been created, this kind of safe haven by that pawn push. And look, the bishop has huge influence along this diagonal. It kind of cuts the board in half. Magnus Carlsen playing a move that I'm surprised by. He is not surprised by Praggnanandhaa's kind of new idea. He moves a knight for the second time. Normally, you don't want to move a piece that's already been developed while other pieces still haven't moved. But he's going to try and maybe bring his bishop out and put pressure on this knight later on. Ambitious play by the world champion.
OK, I have to tell you guys something super exciting. Because we do see another game in this round has ended in a super quick draw. We don't like those. We've been telling everyone at home we don't like those. But we also have a new record in the Meltwater Champions chess tour. And it is set by your man, Gawain Jones. He is still playing his game in round 12 against Lenia Dominguez-Perez. And that means they have now been playing for 73 minutes. That is a new record.
That is a new record. And I did have a quick peek at that position because I was trying to guess whether Gawain was going to win. And he is holding on for dear life. Is he managing to do it?
It's looking difficult now. I thought he was going to make the draw, but they're on move 128 in that game. Could they get to 200? That would be a record for the tour, for sure.
Definitely.
They might already be getting close. I remember a game of 152 moves, I think, between Nakamura and Vidit in an endgame, but this one, it's getting close now.
But it's lasted for more minutes than any other game has done so far in the tour. So applause to Gawain Jones and Lenia Dominguez-Perez. It's fun with those long games.
That's what we like to see, fighting chess.
Definitely.
And, yeah, in England, I think Gawain Jones, another player, Luke McShane, and myself, we're all famous for playing very long games. My record is 236 for moves.
Is that in a classical game? Or
that's in a classical game.
How long did that last, then?
About 8 hours, I think. I've had a few games that are over 8 hours, but this is a very different type of chess, rapid chess that we see in front of us. Lots of moves being played much more quickly.
I do remember at the British Championship one year, I think it was 2011. I think Gawain, was it Gawain involved in that one? Our games finished, we went to dinner, we had a lovely long dinner, we came back, and I think, was it Gawain? Or was
Possibly. I mean, I played a lot of long games in that tournament as well.
Yeah, and then they were still playing.
Gawain against Nick Pert.
Yes, I'm thinking it was that, yeah.
Good memory, Jovanka.
Because it was like, guys, It's like 10 in the evening. What are you doing? I mean, we just really went there just to check out who had won it, and yeah, well.
Actually, the game I mentioned that was 236 moves long, afterwards the arbiter was very angry with me. He said, "Oh, tonight was the arbiter's party and I missed it because of you. I missed dinner, I missed the party, all because of you." So I don't feel guilty there.
I know in the past, and we also seen it in the Queen's Gambit series, that they used to just postpone or stop the games and start again the next day. What was that called?
Adjournment.
Yeah, OK. Why don't they do that anymore?
Yeah, because basically it's a form of cheating in some ways. You're going to get assistance because as soon as you seal the move and you can stop, you can actually analyse the game at home, and you can analyse it with computers, friends, all sorts of things. And that's kind of is kind of not the point of chess. The point of chess is that it's you against your opponent, not you and your mates.
Yeah, and I mean, especially it was the dawn of computers that put an end to that, really. Yeah. In the past, OK, you could analyse with other players, but in the end, it comes down to your moves. But if you can stop a game, go and check a computer, memorise dozens of variations, it's not chess, like you say.
No, but even when it's with your friends, I mean, again, if it's just you and your friend and who's not that much stronger than you, and your opponent has friends with lots of strong grandmasters or whatever, that's going to be a little bit unfair as well. Yeah. Like I read some story that Tigran Petrosian, his wife, was very famous for when the Germans happened to kind of go into the other grandmasters, hey, what do you think about this position? And they were, because she was a woman, she was very charming, and they would kind of say, well, I think this and this, maybe they should play this move. And she would go, yes, OK. And then she would move on to another grandmaster and check out their opinion.
Sneaky.
Yes.
It's all about the espionage in chess. And meanwhile, in this game, OK, we do see the air quality in the Meltwater offices where Carlsen is sitting with his fellow Norwegians. Yep, not ideal humidity, but pretty good air quality. Yeah. Nice temperature for this time in the evening.
No, it is. I think it's a really good air quality, considering the fact that we're in Norway and there hasn't been so much rain here and the air is just very dry. I mean, I don't think you can do too much. So, I mean, the CO2 levels are perfect, and so
he looks very happy and comfortable, at least.
Yeah,
Magnus Carlsen, and comfortable with the air quality. I think he's comfortable with his position on the board as well. And although the computer evaluation bar prefers Prag's position quite significantly, I would have to say, actually, I think Black is just completely fine. Right now, there have been some trades. A set of bishops have left the board, a set of knights have left the board. It's simplified completely. If we bring up the analysis board just to investigate maybe why the computer prefers white, I think it's because computers are slightly biased towards central pawns. And here, there's a small imbalance. Everything's symmetrical apart from these two pawns. And white's pawn here is slightly more centralised than its counterpart on this square. So that's why computers favour white right now. And Pragg, he came up with a really interesting move. He played a double attack. Chess is all about double attacks. The queen brought herself across. She slid to the left this time. And there's an idea of taking this pawn with the bishop or taking this pawn with the queen. And actually, Pragg's done it. He surprised me. Magnus defended that pawn. He blocked this diagonal. And now Pragg, he got greedy. He grabbed a pawn. The queen is actually almost trapped. She had to drop back, only one safe square, and now a queen trade. Pragg is a pawn up against the world champion. The only issue is that these are both double pawns, potential targets. They're also isolated. They won't be protected by other pawns. So you could imagine Black's rook maybe later trying to slide across and grabbing one of those pawns. Looks like a decent practical attempt by Pragg, but with best play, the world champion, he should be OK here. It's not anything to really write home about, having an extra doubled pawn.
Well, I was going to say that, David. I find that this to be a super risky strategy because, first of all, those two pawns, like you say, they're absolutely abysmal, you know. I mean, they're blockaded, they're weak, and once one of them drops off, the second one is just going to be a relentless horror point for white. So, yeah, I'm thinking that Praggnanandhaa actually has to take immediate action right now to resolve one of those weak points. I mean...
Yeah, the saving grace for Pragg is that he will, at the right moment, be able to push forward with his second pawn, the pawn that's behind right now, in order to change it off for Black's strongest point. Yeah. And if this happens... Yeah, he can do it now, but this would pretty much be tantamount to kind of a draw offer, because now Yeah, Black would just hoover everything off the board.
But you're playing the world champion, 15 years old.
No, he won't go for the draw. Pragg is a fighter.
Okay,
I've seen it before.
What do you think?
Here, Black would, just to finish off the point, Black would attack this bishop and then win the pawn back and complete symmetry, probably a draw. I think Pragg, while there's life in the position, he will still try and press. I think there's other things White can do. White can try and occupy the open line. White can try and maybe bring his other rook across to play this pawn push. I think it will be a draw, but I don't think he'll go for it immediately. What do you think, Jovanka?
I think he's going to go for it. I think he's going to seize that chance to simplify the position. Because the thing is, what I like about that position for White is that, you know, you don't have to be a 2700 or 2500 to actually draw it. You can be relatively... you can just be a lower stat because the moves itself and the position itself is pretty simple. So why not take the game into something like that where the margin for error is pretty low?
I see the temptation, Jovanka. So you would do that against the world champion, you think?
Yes.
Get that half point?
Yes. You know, it's quite funny. I was playing in a tournament and my husband, it's always been his dream to take a point from a grandmaster. You know, he just, you know, a draw, a win, didn't matter. And his plan has always been, when he gets that winning position against the grandmaster, he's going to offer a draw. And I was like, oh, come on, you know. And then I was playing a tournament and he finished, you know, he finished his game against the grandmaster and I kind of just looked at him like, well, how did you do? And he looked at me really defensively, like, a draw. And I was like, OK, what happened there? And then I went over to analysis and he was like 4 pawns up. And I was like, you should have played on. But here, I think, you know, I think I would take the draw. Well, not take the draw, because I don't think Magnus would give the draw very easily, but I would try to simplify the position so that I didn't have to work so hard.
Yeah, you would guide things towards safety at least. Look at Magnus there, his body language. He does not look happy with this game. Wow, OK, he looked off to the side there. He just thought, I mean, it looks like he's thinking, oh, should have kept it more exciting and should have kept more life in the position. But right now, OK, Pragg is thinking. Pragg 5 minutes down on the clock. The longer Pragg thinks here, the more tempting it will be to play that pawn move, to try and initiate more trades and go for that draw. But Magnus, maybe while he was leaning back, he was just thinking, how can I confuse the youngster here? How can I just keep him playing, well, keep forcing him to find accurate moves to keep the game going?
Exactly. So whilst we're waiting for Praggnanandhaa to come to a decision, whether he's going to keep the tension in the position or just simplify, I'd like to remind everyone that we do have a quiz of the day and we are asking everyone, who would you be if you could be someone else for one day? And once again, we have some cool answers. Harry Gelshout says, I want to be the official photographer of Magnus and Jan on the upcoming championship. Capturing their emotions before and after chess moves will be an honour, absolutely. And Da Vinci says, I'd pick Shaq for a day because I'd hang out with my best friend, Badur Jabova, and listen to Enrique Iglesias while streaming few chess games online.
I love it.
Apparently they'll get the joke. It's an inside joke. I'm not quite sure. I haven't watched them stream. David, maybe you have.
Yeah, Badur Jabova, he's actually one of the most entertaining grandmasters in the world, both on the chessboard and off the chessboard. And Badur Jabova, he does stream. And every time I log onto his stream, there's barely any chess being played. He's just dancing. He's literally just standing there and dancing. I've actually played marathon matches with him as well, but he's one of the most entertaining players to watch because he would not approve of these quick draws. He fights in every game, no matter the opponent. And one player who's also fighting in every game, Praggnanandhaa. Pragg not going for that drawish line, being more ambitious. That's what we love to see from the young player, from the teenager. He didn't try to just completely swap everything off and make the draw. He went for a different pawn push, but now he is left with weaknesses. So risky decision from him. But he's not afraid of the world champion, clearly. And he's definitely going to try and win this one because that gives him the best chance of qualification.
OK, so David, you have to be brutally honest here. Now, would you have played like Praggnanandhaa or would you have simplified?
I wish I could have said that I would have been ambitious, but probably I would have done the same as you, Jovanka. Maybe in a different order. I think there were other ways for White to keep the game going without too much risk, but this one, is taking significant risk.
Yeah. And do you think it's a good choice?
Again, difficult, but objectively, it does look a bit flawed for white, long-term at least. If we bring up the analysis board, we can see what Pragg did in this position. Jovanka was advocating this pawn push, maybe the most natural move in the position. And as we mentioned, in a position like this, once those pawns disappear and Black would regain this pawn with complete equality, everything symmetrical. We could imagine the rooks coming off the board and a draw would be agreed very soon. Instead, Pragg went with the other pawn. Instead of pushing here on the left, he went in the centre, he pushed forward with this pawn, and Magnus Carlsen, instead of allowing White's bishop to get active after a trade along this diagonal, he said, OK, you can trade, but only on my terms. So instead, he retreated his knight, defending this stronghold. Now Pragg has jumped forward with his own knight. And no matter where this bishop goes, if it drops back or if it maybe comes to the side of the board, a more active square, I suddenly think, actually, this pawn, as you mentioned, Jovanka, is going to drop off. And not just that, maybe the worst point behind it is that the other pawn will be a huge target for the rest of the game. So I think objectively, maybe a bad decision, but I like the spirit behind it. I like the attitude.
I do like the spirit. I mean, I admire that completely, but I do think you have to be practical. I remember someone saying to me, I was desperately trying to try to gain a win, and I was taking big risks against someone who was lower rated than me. And he said to me, Jovanka, be practical. At times, you just have to accept the position is draw. Don't try to force what you want to happen to it. And you also have to bear in mind that psychologically, Magnus doesn't want to draw. Or maybe in this particular scenario, he might do. But he really doesn't want to be drawing a game. He wants to be winning. And he perhaps will be the one taking the risk to avoid all these simple positions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the first few times I managed to beat grandmasters in classical chess was because they definitely didn't want to draw against a kid. They were pressing hard against me, and I managed to counterattack when they were careless for a moment. So I understand that strategy, but Pragg, I think his philosophy in this one is a draw. It's not going to help him. He's going to be 1.5 points off the qualification places with 2 rounds remaining. He wants to take a risk. And Magnus, I mean, it's hard to read Magnus's body language right now. Yeah. He doesn't look too energetic. He looks a bit dejected. And I'm surprised by his last move, offering that bishop trade. OK, not a bad move at all from Magnus Carlsen, but I think maybe keeping the bishops on the board would have given more winning chances. And, OK, the bishops are disappearing now. And, OK, we'll see Praggnanandhaa. He has a choice. He can capture that bishop. If he's feeling extra fruity, he can maybe push a pawn in the centre of the board, attack Black's knight. But no, he does capture the bishop. Definitely the safest option. I do notice, Gawain Jones's game did finish after 139 moves, eventually.
How did he do?
He didn't manage to save the game.
Unfortunately. But he did set a record.
He did set a record.
It lasted for, I think, like 80 minutes, which is the longest game so far in the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour. So we really applaud that. Fantastic. Fighting spirit by Gawain Jones.
Yes, and fighting spirit by Pragg. Right now, though, he does have a pawn under attack. The reason I'm surprised by Magnus's decision is because now, if you look at White's furthest advanced pawn, it's defended by the White knight. And knights are fantastic defenders of pawns. They're fantastic blockaders in general. They're very multi-purpose pieces. And if you can't remove that White knight, you won't regain that pawn. And it was more important to capture the front pawn so that the second pawn would become weak.
Yeah, you wanted the backward pawn to be alive because, I do absolutely adore Praggnanandhaa's strategy here. It's actually very instructive. He says, fine, you can win my backward pawn because once that pawn goes, I have more firepower to support the far advanced pawn, which is going to be really, really dangerous. And I completely agree with you. I felt that Magnus made some missteps there.
Yeah, I think he just had better moves, simply. And if we bring up the analysis board, because Magnus, he had an opportunity. Remember, Black is a pawn down. He had the opportunity to grab a pawn back. And I think 99% of humans, they would just see a pawn, they would take a pawn. Black's knight grabbing a pawn back, attacking the rook, attacking this pawn. But as Jovanka mentions, when the rook steps forward, the Black knight is driven back. You can't continue being greedy because your knight would simply be trapped on the edge of the board. Knights on the rim are dim. But once the knight is driven back to a central square. Suddenly, because this white pawn has disappeared, it does open up a line for white's rook. White's rook will support this pawn, and rooks are great behind passed pawns. It will help its foot soldier march forward later on. So Magnus not getting greedy and grabbing that pawn, instead just bringing his rook up, stopping white's rook from using this square. And when Pragg finally defends this pawn, Magnus reroutes his own knight. He's going backwards. It's a long-winded way to do it, but he's going the whole way around to try and win his pawn back.
Yeah.
Praggnanandhaa, though, currently a pawn up. Can he do anything to win? Or at least to put some pressure on? Because right now, I mean, if black achieves this, if black gets 2 moves, knight back and takes this pawn, it will just be a draw.
So the starting point for me would be, OK, fine, let's align my rooks together in a nice straight line. And then my idea is, yes.
Going the whole way up.
Yes, exactly. There is, after all, now I can align myself. Yep.
Yep, putting pressure here. Maybe black can hold on with this move, but then actually maybe you're pushing forward.
That is my plan, David.
Breaking the coordination. If black takes, then you take this knight.
Yes.
I think actually black would have to use this square.
OK, we might actually see this kind of action on the board because Praggnanandhaa, he has been listening to us. Well, he's not actually listening to us, I'd say.
Maybe he's psychic. And he can...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Magnus, meanwhile, using this square because the other knight square I suggested isn't working. But look, Praggnanandhaa, he's playing for the win. This is so aggressive, so ambitious. Magnus, he looked off to the side there. Has he missed something? Magnus Carlsen doesn't look happy at all. I mean, he's the one fighting for the draw, fighting for his life in this game. He supports his rook. He supports the black rook, trying to win back his pawn, but it's not easy. Praggnanandhaa trying everything.
Oh, classy move by Praggnanandhaa there.
He's really putting the pressure on. Look, Magnus leaning forward. He knows he has to fight to survive. He attacks, Praggnanandhaa attacks the black knight, but the black knight is a bit stuck. You cannot take this pawn because you would get pinned along this line and you'll lose your knight or your rook. Instead, he has to take the other pawn, Magnus Carlsen. And white has a very strong passed pawn here. Black's rook is very passive. Carlsen should hold the draw, but Praggnanandhaa, he's the only one who can win this one.
Wow, impressive stuff by the 15-year-old. Exciting game going on here. And he's fighting for qualification, the young Indian right now. I'm going to check. So he is currently in 11th place with 5.5 points. And we do have Levon Aronian on the crucial 8th place with 7 points. So he needs to score, 1.5 points probably. He probably needs to win 2 games, Praggnanandhaa, to qualify.
He probably needs at least 2.5 from his last 3 games and hope for the best. But yeah, one thing Magnus has tried to do that I actually tried to do when I played Praggnanandhaa a few years ago is he's taking him straight to the endgame, but Praggnanandhaa is pretty strong in that department. I actually had a very similar scenario to this with an extra set of rooks on the board. And Praggnanandhaa, he outmaneuvered me in that game. He's outmaneuvering Magnus Carlsen right now. Magnus has gone very passive with the black rook. It's still difficult to make progress for Pragg. He needs to activate the white king as quickly as possible. The white king is doing nothing. Look at this, black pushing a pawn forward, stopping white's knight from jumping and creating a path for the black king to march towards the centre. I think Pragg, it's time to get that king into the game somehow.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether you could also push your pawn 1 square forward just to be a little bit cheeky.
Yep. Actually, Jovanka, maybe that's a very strong move right now.
All right.
Yeah, you spotted it. So let's bring up the analysis board because Pragg, he's only got 5 minutes, but that should be enough. OK, he pushes this pawn to create a path in for his king towards the centre later on. But the move Jovanka suggested, pushing this pawn just 1 square, actually, I think that's extremely strong because if black brings the king towards the centre, you bring your knight here. And after a trade of knights, suddenly you have a protected passed pawn. These pawns are connected. And black here, maybe, again, he can hold. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see white win this one after marching the king all the way up to support these pawns. He can still do it, Pragg, but after pushing this pawn, this is a potential weakness. So very committal stuff. Let's see Magnus lining up his pawns in a bit of an odd formation here.
Oh, what should we call these ones?
The wall.
The wall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. One of my friends, well, one of the perks of being a chess player is that when you tell someone that they play chess, a lot of people tend to respond with, yeah, they play chess as well. And so they've heard a lot of things. And one of my friends played one of these self-proclaimed chess players. And he said, yes, I know what to do. You can play the Berlin Wall. And then he proceeded to open up with every single pawn. And she was like, yes, that is the Berlin Wall.
The wall, or the who has that song? Just Another Brick in the Wall. Pink Floyd.
Yes.
Ah, the Pink Floyd pawns.
Yeah.
Going to a Pink Floyd concert all together.
If Ding Liren played that pawn structure, the Great Wall of China.
Yeah.
OK, meanwhile...
Or if a German player played it.
Yeah.
The Berlin Wall.
Yeah, there is an opening called the Berlin Wall, but...
that's a very popular one.
Yeah, we've seen it many, many times. But meanwhile, the wall has broken formation.
Ooh,
Magnus...
definitely Berlin Wall then.
One of those bricks has fallen out. Magnus did push forward and trade a set of pawns. Now the Black King's coming, the White King's also heading towards the centre. I'm surprised how quickly Magnus is playing, though, just because there are dangers in this position. Look at the bar, Kaya. Look at the bar. It's over on white side. Magnus, he's still struggling. Look at the Black King. It's slightly more passive than White's King. White's King is the quickest. It is the first to win that race to the centre of the board.
And now with the king in a prime position, is getting ready to go into the centre. It's also protecting the weak pawn. Now we can do my plan.
Yeah, I really like your plan. Let's see if Pragg has found it. Maybe he's got that in mind for a bit later on. Magnus, meanwhile...
Well, this is probably why Magnus has played his king up.
Yeah, he's played his king up the board. I mean, maybe you can still proceed with your plan.
Yes, maybe you can still do it.
Yeah, maybe it's less strong now somehow. But OK.
Yeah, king forward. I do like this move. Keeping control. You know, they have this kind of maxim in games, which is hurry, but don't rush. You know, and it's just all about improving your pieces and not spoiling those critical moments. And OK, Magnus gives a check to the White King. Where would you go, David? Would you continue in the centre, or would you...
I mean, you could go back where you came from, but then Black will drop the knight back and you haven't really made any progress. Most ambitious is to go to the centre, right? King of the hill, as they say. King in the castle. That White King occupying the centre. I would slide to the left one square, just attack that Black knight. But choices for Pragg. Of course, that does entail some small risks if you do go too adventurous with your king. So he's just weighing up whether it's worth continuing the king's journey. Magnus looks quite composed, but maybe he's one player who always on the back foot in endgames. He is confident of holding slightly worse positions or positions when he's a pawn down. He knows he should still not lose this one as Black, but maybe he doesn't realise that there is still some danger.
You mentioned that young players, one thing that sort of recognises young players is that they see very optimistic on all their positions. So do you think Pragg is looking at this and being very optimistic and just seeing ways of winning this game?
Yeah, I think we'll find out now, because Magnus, he's offering a repetition of the position. If Pragg moves his king up one square, that's the second time we will have seen that position. But Pragg, he's been optimistic so far in this game, right? And it's paid off.
Definitely. It definitely paid off. And I have to say, it's just like Surav on Twitter says. Magnus Carlsen struggling against a 1700 rated prodigy, which is a little bit unfair on Praggnanandhaa, because he's not 1700 really, is exactly why we love chess. And here you go. Here is the break for freedom. So Praggnanandhaa just almost like playing with Magnus, saying yes.
Yeah. He's teasing the world champion here. He's asserting his dominance over the world champion.
Cheeky.
He did not go for the repetition immediately. He can still repeat the position if... I mean, Magnus doesn't look happy, right? He doesn't look happy at all. But, OK, Pragg has the option to make a draw immediately if he just brings his king across one square. But will he do it? He only has 3 minutes left. Will he play for the win? Can he go for your plan still, Jovanka? The problem is, if you don't repeat the position, Black's king will get into the centre of the board. It's looking difficult to win, but...
I mean, he's playing so, you know, he's taking the risks and it's really paid off. I mean, I think why not continue? And I definitely agree. Go for my plan.
OK, he goes for a different plan. His rook drops back one square. Maybe it's similar to your plan. Maybe he still wants to exchange those knights and get his rook into the game. Praggnanandhaa, I mean, just his attitude, his optimism, everything, it's so refreshing, right?
Yeah.
Not getting scared of the world champion. He's turned down a few opportunities now to go into a drawish position or to repeat the position. It's, yeah, this is what we like to see. And this type of attitude shows that he's going to go far and maybe one day will challenge for the world title. Yeah,
I totally agree. And it is going to send a shiver down Magnus's spine, let's face it, because he's doing to Magnus what Magnus normally does to other people.
Exactly. In an endgame as well. I mean, to be so young and so confident, so calm in these endgames against the greatest endgame player probably of all time. Yeah, OK. Meanwhile, Magnus goes forward with his king. Black now threatening to win a pawn, so Pragg has to be quick with his ideas. His idea here must be to trade knights, right, Jovanka?
Yeah, and you were seeing it on the board. And the knights are going to get swapped off. And the big idea is that after king takes pawn, well, Praggnanandhaa would have immediately gone and challenged the black rook. OK, but Magnus has been pushed back even further. And it's all going to be about that passed pawn in the middle.
Yep, if we bring up the analysis board, just to show what has changed with that knight swap, we do see in this position Black dropping back with his rook. As Jovanka mentioned, the most natural move is actually to grab this pawn. Black a pawn ahead here, but White would slide up with his rook, kicking back the enemy rook. Black can't afford to exchange these rooks because White would queen this pawn, and instead White would have a choice of which pawns to snack on. Magnus preempts that by dropping his rook back first, but the same thing has happened pretty much. White brings his rook forward, eyeing up lots of pawns. We see a check, a trade, and whose pawn is faster? We've got a race now, Jovanka. This pawn is pretty far advanced. This pawn as well. It's only 3 squares away. How is White going to stop that? Do you stop it? Do you ignore it? It's definitely a race now. I'm not sure which one is going to be quicker.
Yeah, it's about counting, isn't it? And it's all going to hinge as well on what happens should the rooks actually give themselves away for the mutual passed pawns. And it could be, well, in that situation that the kings...
I mean, it could be a crazy king and pawn race if you imagine, as Jovanka's mentioning, Black eventually giving his rook up for this pawn, White eventually maybe giving up his rook for this pawn. Suddenly, it's about whose king is faster. Will this pawn be faster to win the game? Will this pawn be faster? It's so many different types of races right now. And Magnus here, he does have the luxury, however, of having a long time to work out and calculate these pawn races. Pragg, he's down to 2 minutes, and it's very tense. It's on a knife edge right now. Personally, I would just push this pawn and hope for the best, but even then, the consequences are so unclear. This one, yeah, it's getting exciting still.
And look at the bottom of the picture now. We see that Karyakin Tari. It could be that Tari is looking quite good against Sergei Karyakin, and it is Tari and Pragg on the same score right now in 10th and 11th place, both fighting to qualify. So a win here would actually be kind of important to Pragg.
Yeah, and he's not shown any fear. He's not caring who the opponent is. He's still playing for that win, turning down the opportunity to make draws. Look at that, bringing his rook back. That rook will be needed on that bottom line to stop the advance of Black's pawn, to stop the promotion of Black's pawn into a queen. So, yeah, looks like a very sensible move. And next, Pragg's idea is to march the White king up the board and kind of hold the hand of the White pawn and guide it towards promotion. Magnus, he's playing instantly every move, but I would be terrified as Black here because one wrong move, if you're one move too slow in the race, you're just losing. And, OK, Magnus gives a check with his rook. That's an important one. When White's king sidesteps to the left, I mean, there's nowhere else to go, Black's rook will drop down and defend its own pawn.
From the back, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, he would defend the pawn from the side and start giving...
From the side.
And control the enemy pawn from the back. And that's where rooks love to be. They love to be defending from the back. This is actually magnificent play by Magnus. Very defensive, but absolutely exemplary. What an idea.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wonder whether maybe Pragg missed a small opportunity, but yeah, either way, it's not clear. Maybe he could have gone with his king before his rook, and he would have had great winning chances. But OK, Magnus is still the one fighting for the draw.
OK, but I mean, can we still kind of push the pawn forward and...
Yep. If White's pawn pushes forward now, Black's rook has to give check from behind to try and stop that pawn.
OK, so we're seeing it on the board. OK, so now Magnus has given a check, and now I'm just thinking... Just march your king a little bit forward, one square diagonally forward to attack the pawn. Yep, Praggnanandhaa has played it. And now
Black has to keep giving checks because actually white was threatening to take black's pawn there and win the game immediately by distracting the black rook.
Yes.
And now black's rook, he's going to do a bit of a dance up and down, right and left, just checking the white king, attacking the pawn, checking the white king, attacking the pawn. How are you going to win this one, though, Jovanka? Is there a way for the...
With help,
With help.
OK, so maybe I can just support the pawn one more time.
With the king?
Yes.
OK, I'll give you a check again.
Correct.
OK, so you'll support the king. I'll give a check.
I'll hide my king in front of the...
In front of the pawn. Yeah. Now, maybe you have to be careful of this king coming, or maybe black has time... Oh, whoops, sorry. Me and my arrows. Black has time maybe to grab this pawn. Instead, the king has gone the other direction. It's still getting checked, though. Pragg, he's still trying to win. Every move, though, his opponent's going to give check. Magnus has to give a check here to survive. Where's this king going to hide? There's just no safe haven here. Maybe there's just no way for Pragg to win. It's so close. One move away, but not close enough. The world champion defending tenaciously. And after the king hides on this square, black's rook has gone back. It looks like we might be repeating the position. Let's go back to Pragg. I want to see how disappointed or how excited he's looking.
He's trying, David.
He's trying.
I mean, we do admire his gutsiness, and he's taken his chances on this endgame. And unfortunately, I think because white's pawns are so far backwards and black's pieces are quite active, I don't think it's enough to... Well, actually, I believe it's not enough to draw. I mean, to win.
To win, yeah. Unfortunately for white, he does have... OK, yes, one pass pawn on that left side, which will try and march up the board and become a queen, but he does have a weak pawn on the other side, and now white's rook is forced onto a terrible square in order to defend it. So black's king, sooner or later, will actually go after that pawn. Still some work to be done by the world champion, but he tends to be fantastic in these rook and pawn endings. Often if you're just one pawn up, especially when it's a corner pawn, a rook's pawn, yeah, it's not ideal because you can get checked from the side and you can't use your pawn to block. You can't hide your king away behind its own pawn if it's a rook's pawn. You need an extra line to the side. And here, black's going after white's pawn. This one should be a draw, but Pragg still trying. Again, he is the only one who can win.
Yeah. So are we expecting Pragg just simply to abandon the defence of the pawn on the right and simply push the one on the left? And we're seeing that on the board.
That's right. He's trying his best to get his pawn running, to get that race started. But the problem is, once he does lose this pawn on the right, which he will after black's king advances...
Black starts pushing his pawn.
Black's going to push his pawn, and at the very least, black can eventually give up the black rook for white's pawn on the left and just march his pawn down. I think both rooks will have to give each other up for their opposing pawns. And OK, I mean, I'm hoping the players played out right to the bitter end just to show us exactly how the game will finish and reach a logical conclusion. Yeah, I mean, I really like what Pragg's done. He's got so close, actually. It'll be interesting to analyse that endgame in more detail to see if he did miss a chance, because this one, the world champion, pushing that pawn, I'm slightly surprised. I would have just gone forward with the king one square, just immediately kick away that white rook and take away white's pawn, but...
Yeah, Magnus is saying, I can do that whenever I like, David.
But I would be slightly afraid of white pushing a pawn up now, once pushing his pawn up on that right side. But probably there's just a way to win it anyway.
And look at the result in Karyakin Tari. Tari has been able to get a win in that super important game for the 21-year-old. He is still fighting to qualify for the knockout stage, which would be huge, huge for the 24-year-old Norwegian. Pragg, he was on the same score as Pragg before this round. Looks like Pragg only will get half a point away from this one.
Yeah. But either way, I mean, even if Pragg doesn't qualify for these knockouts, so many positive signs.
Yeah.
I mean, he's beaten some of the top players in the world. But also, I mean, to take the world champion to a position like this, Magnus has had to be so accurate just to hold the draw.
Yeah.
It's good signs of things to come.
I really hope we get a reaction from Magnus after this game. And you know, if he can tell us if he's impressed by this 15-year-old, he must be.
I mean, I can't even describe how impressed I am by him. OK, meanwhile, white has kept his pawn alive on the right. His pawn on the left is marching forward, but look how Magnus has cut off the white king. The white king is trapped in front of its own pawn right now. That's a really instructive formation. And now white is going to actually run out of moves. So eventually his rook will have to move, giving up his pawn. And Magnus, yeah, he's trapped that white king.
Yes,
very instructive.
He's making it clear. He's kind of almost saying to Praggnanandhaa, you know, you can have the dream, but it's not enough.
Yep.
Because, yes, OK, Praggnanandhaa pushes this pawn as far as it can go. And now I think the only chance to try to win this is simply to try to create some form of bridge for the white king to escape. But as soon as that happens, if the white king is released, then Magnus can just simply give up his rook for the pawn. And unfortunately, with the white king being so far away from those two pawns on the right, just cannot stop that pawn from queening.
Yeah, and there we go, Praggnanandhaa. He does give up his pawn because there was nothing else to do. And the white rook is going to try and build a bridge for the king to finally step out of the way of its pawn. There we go. And now black's pawn, though, is going to cost white his rook long term. Yeah, this one headed towards a draw. I was wondering if we'd see some kind of stylish stalemate when white's king was trapped in the corner. But Pragg wanted to keep trying to win. And, yeah, both rooks are going to have to give themselves up for those pawns. And a draw is imminent.
Yeah.
How is... OK, is it a draw here? Magnus looks like he's very finished with the game, at least.
Yeah. We're going to go for king against king, though, I think, fighting it out right to the end. This is what a draw should be, a real fighting game.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a quick repetition.
And now it's in... there it is. It's a draw between 15-year-old Praggnanandhaa and world champion Carlsen. Magnus not looking too happy. It's not disappointment either, but... how is Pragg feeling after this? I mean, a draw against the world champion, fantastic, but he had huge winning possibilities here. Yeah,
mixed feelings, surely, for Pragg. I mean, so many positives to take away. He put the pressure on throughout the entire game. He never really lost too much control, and he had Magnus sweating.